The Boy Who Reversed Himself by Louis Sachar, 2. Roger was limping around on the snakehead cane. "Would you boys like some lemonade?" he asked in a crotchety old voice that sounded nothing like Mrs. Bayfield. Scott and Randy laughed. David hurried up behind them. "Whew," he said, "we did it." "All right," said Randy. He held up his hand for David to slap. David slapped at it, but almost missed. Only his last two fingers hit Randy's hand. He'd never been very comfortable with high fives. "There are some cups out in the porch, if you would be so kind," whined Roger. "I'd get them myself, but I'm too ugly." Randy and Scott laughed. David smiled. "Well, I gotta go," he said with a half shrug, half wave. "Homework. Later," said Randy. "Yes, see ya, Ballinger," said Scott. For the last week or so, Scott had only called David by his last name. "Simpson," he replied. David walked home feeling miserable. He felt worried, too. What if she called the police? Well, at least he wasn't the one who pulled her rocking chair over. He didn't pour lemonade on her head. He didn't step on her flowers or break her window. He didn't steal her cane. All he did was flip her off. Really, when you think about it, what's so wrong with that? All he did was point his middle finger at her. What makes the middle finger any worse than any other finger? What if he had just pointed his pinky at her? That wouldn't have been a bad thing to do, would it? As far as he could remember, he'd never given anyone the finger before, at least not for real. He remembered when he first learned about it in the 3rd grade. He and Scott used to practice giving it to each other. It took a lot of practice to be able to do it quickly. They'd flip each other off all day in class, but only in fun. It was kind of like a game of tag. They'd pretend to scratch their nose at the back of their neck, but they'd always be pointing their middle fingers at each other. It was too bad that Scott had become friends with Roger and Randy. Actually, Randy wasn't so bad. He would probably be a good guy, thought David, if it wasn't for Roger. But he knew the reason he had given Mrs. Bayfield the finger was to try to impress Roger. What do I care what Roger thinks, he asked himself, except he did care, and he knew it. "Hi, David," his brother greeted him when he got home. "Hi, Rick," he muttered. "You want to play a game or something?" Ricky asked. "I got homework," said David. "I have to memorize the Gettysburg Address." "We could just throw the ball around," suggested Ricky. David smiled. "Okay, sure." They threw the baseball back and forth in the backyard. In a way, David felt like he was doing a good deed to make up for the bad deed he had done earlier. He knew how much Ricky looked up to him. Ricky was in the 5th grade. Anything David did, Ricky wanted to do too. There was never an argument about what to watch on TV. Ricky wanted to watch whatever David wanted to watch. When David mentioned he liked a song on the radio, Ricky would go out and buy the record, saying it was his favorite group. If David told Ricky a joke, he'd hear Ricky repeat it to his friends the next day, even if it wasn't all that funny. David caught the ball and threw it back to his brother, who was using David's old baseball glove. David had given it to him at the end of last season. Ricky could hardly believe it. "Wow, this is the same glove you made that famous catch with," he had said. David didn't know what Ricky was talking about. "Remember when you caught that hot smash and stepped on second base for a double play?" David had played second base. He was okay, but to hear Ricky tell it, he was a superstar. "They should put you at shortstop instead of Scott," Ricky said. Scott always seemed a little better than David at everything. Even his grades were better. That was something David couldn't understand. How could someone as smart as Scott get along so well with idiots like Roger and Randy? He threw the ball back to his brother. He wondered what Ricky would think of him if he knew what his life was really like. That he hung around with guys who didn't especially like him. That he helped steal a cane from a defenseless old lady. What if she was still lying helplessly on the ground? What if she can't walk at all without her cane? He imagined her having to drag herself across the overgrown yard, up the wooden stairs to the porch and into the house. Roger broke her front window, so all over the floor there would probably be broken glass that she'd have to crawl across. The glass pitcher probably broke too. She could be bleeding to death at this very moment. He tried not to think about it as he threw the ball back to Ricky. She probably didn't have any family or friends, he thought. She was happy to see us, delighted to have some visitors. Or what if she did have a family? Will she be able to tell them what happened? Or will she just clean herself up and say nothing to anyone because it's too humiliating? Maybe just pretend it never happened. "How did you break the window?" her son might ask. "Oh, clumsy old me," she'd answer, not wanting to talk about it. David almost felt like crying. What if some kids did that to his own grandmother, or to his mother when she got old, or to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was his baby sister who had just had her first birthday. Mrs. Bayfield was once 1 year old. She was once a cute baby girl whom everybody loved. Who would have thought then that someday she'd be a crippled, lonely old lady, and some kids would knock her chair over, pour lemonade on her head, and steal her cane? And then, when she's lying helplessly on the ground, humiliated, unable to walk, without a friend in the world, some stupid kid flips her off. He threw the ball hard, too hard, to his brother. He hadn't meant to throw it that hard. Ricky caught it and beamed. "Nice throw!" David sighed as he considered going back to see her. He wanted to make sure she was all right. Maybe he could even be her friend. At least tell her he was sorry. He wanted to go back, but he didn't. What if Roger and Randy found out? He'd be the joke of the school. Besides, the police might be there waiting for him. The criminal always returns to the scene of the crime. Ricky threw the ball as hard as he could. David had to jump to catch it backhanded. "Great catch," said Ricky. David started to throw the ball back to Ricky, but for a split second, instead of seeing his brother, he saw the image of Mrs. Bayfield, tipped over in her rocking chair with her legs up in the air and her black and white striped underwear with red ruffles. The ball sailed high over his brother's head and went way off to the left. It shattered their parents' bedroom window. And that's the end of chapter 2.